ain't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What is up, Earthmania subscribers? It's Ernie, the Blur Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, so you guys know I'm a huge fan of tabletop RPGs. I talk about it sometimes on the Blur Cave, which, by the way, live streams every Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, but that's neither here nor there. Point of the matter is that I have been in the tabletop gaming space for a long time. I've been playing tabletop role-playing games since I was like 17 years old. I started out with advanced Dungeons and Dragons and then shifted over towards 3rd edition, 4th edition, and now 5th edition. I played tons of other RPGs like Cthulhu Tech, Call of Cthulhu. I've played a lot of the Star Wars RPGs, both of the Wizards of the Coast version as well as like the old like D6 edition versions, as well as like the various and sundry different Marvel and DC RPGs that have existed throughout the years. I even at one point wanted to make my own tabletop RPG. I actually sat down and crafted rules, and that's another story altogether. Point of the matter is, I was reached out to by Monolith, the creator of some of my personal favorite tabletop RPGs and board games, things like Conan the board game, which was like wildfire, selling like hotcakes on Kickstarter as well as on their website, as well as their Conan Hyborian Age RPG version of that same game, Reichbusters, which is probably one of my most favorite ways to beat up Nazis in a board game setting. And they've also tackled the Batman franchise. I was one of their early adopters on their Batman Gotham City Chronicles tabletop board game, which is a fantastic game system that I was always shocked didn't become something more until it did a couple of years ago. And they are back again with the Gotham City Chronicles RPG, an RPG version of the same game, but with way more in-depth systems and a full-on cavalcade of different story modes and abilities and things you can do to create your perfect version of the DC Comics universe's Gotham City. The best part about this RPG is that while, yes, it is for all intents and purposes a Batman RPG, you're playing in the Batman, corner of the DC Comics universe, you can actually make it your own thing. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you right now, as tabletop role-playing games go, you are going to need someone to be the GM. It's thankless work, but it is rewarding. But that said, if you already have a tabletop group or gaming circle, I'm sure that someone in the group is going to want to be the GM, because this is one of those opportunities you get to tell a story in a universe that maybe you've always wanted DC to tell. So now you get to tell that story, and you get to tell it in a few different ways. You'll need at least a couple of other players. I mean, yeah, you could play it with GM just versus one player, but I think it actually works better, in my personal opinion, with at least 2 to 3 other players, but 2 is the bare minimum for my personal enjoyment. You then must decide what kind of story your game is going to be set in, because in this type of universe, there's all types of different characters. Yes, you've got your Batmans, but not everybody can be Batman. There has to be Robins, and there has to be Commissioner Gordons, and that's kind of the beauty of this game, is that it allows you that freedom within the rule set to have your Batman characters, to have your people who are more like in the sidekick or more like on the periphery of Batman, but also have your Renee Montoyas, whether it's just regular ass Renee Montoya, or if it is actually full on the Question Renee Montoya, but also to be the Harvey Bullock or the Commissioner Jim Gordon, if you will. There's all of that freedom within the game to do so, just based on the storytelling system that Monolith has come up with. To start off with the different modes of this game, there's Streets of Gotham City, which, as it says here, it allows you to experience the city from the perspective of its everyday inhabitants, investigators, journalists, policemen, thugs, lawyers, bodyguards, or social workers. When you play in this type of setting, you're not going to be playing as Batman. Let's just keep it a buck. You are probably going to be playing as those kind of boots on the ground characters, as I mentioned earlier. Your Harvey Bullocks, your Jim Gordons, a Vicky Vale of some sort. You're not going to be playing as the heavy hitters in this. I think that's for those people who really want to tell a more grounded story, that don't really want to get into all the chicanery that Batman usually comes with, but still want to play in that sandbox. Now, another setting for the game is Shadows of Gotham City. And this is where I think I kind of found my happy place in the middle ground here, and I'll kind of tell you a little bit why here in a moment. But primarily this mode is to wear the costumes of vigilantes or supervillains, crime fighters, martial arts masters, genius inventors, criminal masterminds, and all characters with extraordinary abilities. This is, and just to say, this is kind of where I personally prefer, because to me, this is peak Batman. This is your Batman where you're not getting too terribly far out into the crazy stuff. You're really focusing more on just telling a traditional Batman story, something where, yeah, Batman's gonna stop Joker from poisoning Gotham's water supply, or bust into the Iceberg Lounge to stop Penguin from, selling illegal arms and weapons, I don't know, whoever, I'm just making something up. But point is, this is, if you love Batman comics and you love the craziness that comes with them, this is the mode I think you're gonna live in. And that's just me. Now, there is a third mode, as I mentioned earlier, and that is the wonders of Gotham City. This is to embody characters with supernatural abilities such as Clayface or Poison Ivy. Now, I think personally you can play those characters, or I won't say play them. I think you can go up against them. This mode is, I feel, more geared towards people who want to play as characters who are like these characters. If you just want to fight these characters, I think it's perfectly fine to play the Shadows of Gotham City. You'll be outgunned in the skill category just a bit, but it's still going to be doable. This is for if you want to play them. And me personally, when I think of playing a Batman RPG, I don't want to play anybody with superpowers. I want to be, I don't know. I want to get my hands dirty. I want to be the Bat, or, someone similar to the Bat. Which, speaking of, you can play as those different iconic characters. There are rules in place for if you want to be Batman. Do you want to be Robin? Do you want to be Huntress? You want to be Catwoman? You want to be Alfred, for Christ's sakes? I don't know. I mean, that's you. You could be Pennyworth out here. But I enjoy the fact that this game actually has all of those different options available to you, but also makes it incredibly easy for you to pick the different, stats and, skill sets and things that you want to build the character that is living rent-free in your head, that if you lived in Gotham, this is who you would be. But to also take it a step further, to give you a little bit more insight on each of these modes largely are just based on what is going to be available to you. How many points and skills are you going to be able to accrue and use? What is going to be at your disposal? Not only that, you're not dialed in to whichever mode you choose for the game at the beginning. You can actually shift it and switch things up as you move along. Now, while I've talked about this being an RPG, this is the book that you're going to be playing out of. This book is not super thick. It has, honestly, more supplemental information in it. If you're playing as the GM, I think you should read the whole book for the most part. But if you're as a player, I don't think you need to read the whole thing cover to cover. I think honestly, yeah, once you get to about chapter 4, maybe chapter 5, I think that's pretty much it for you. I think it's really one of those things, because the combat system is so easy in the game. The way things work in the game is incredibly easy, because this is all rocking off of a D20 system. So anyone that's played Dungeons and Dragons, it's going to be incredibly familiar to you. And if you've never played Dungeons and Dragons, it's really easy to teach. You'll be able to determine whether or not your character is going to start off at level 1, or if you want to start off at a later level. It's just like with Dungeons and Dragons. If you start off at level 1, just think of yourself as a character who quite literally has just started doing the thing. Like if you're playing a Batman style character, you are Christian Bale when he didn't have the bat suit. He hasn't ordered all the parts yet. He's still figuring his stuff out. That's who you are about, more or less. You don't even have a bat symbol. You haven't even gotten the voice. You haven't even gotten that together yet. You're just getting going. You'll figure out all your primary statistics, and strength, constitution, and dexterity and intelligence. Those are going to be the most common things, from a D20 system game that you'll see. But in place of wisdom, you'll have perception, and in place of charisma, you'll have willpower. There's hit points as well as melee attacks and ranged attacks. As you would in pretty much any D20 system, you're going to add strength to all your melee attacks, dexterity to all your ranged attacks. There's also other little systems, things like that I feel like you'll figure them out as you go go along. But the main thing is you'll be picking your advantages, your disadvantages, which are ultimately the things you're good at and the things you suck at. Like, you might be ambidextrous. You could probably use a weapon in both hands if you so choose, without really incurring any, major penalty of any kind, as a character who is not ambidextrous and trying to do so would. But on the other hand, you might be fugly. That could be a disadvantage. And the cool thing about disadvantages, while I think that in terms of how they work in system, they are basically used to get you more points for advantages, which is pretty common in RPGs. In this game, you're only really required to take 1 or 2 disadvantages, and I would even dare say that if you just want to be a bog standard character that doesn't want to have any extra points, you could probably go without having any disadvantages at all. But I do think they help flesh out your character in some ways that maybe you wouldn't have organically have thought of on your own. Though I will say to GMs, don't let your players go overboard taking in all the disadvantages just so they can get more points. I think that way lies madness. All of a sudden, you're gonna have characters running around saying, "Oh, I'm super fugly, and I also have, I'm terrified of water. Oh yeah. Also, by the way, I don't like when cats walk on rooftops, and whenever I walk out into the sunlight, oh, I sunburn a little bit more than other." Yeah, don't let them get too crazy with it. They're just trying to min-max. Stop it. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, okay, well, you've told me a good bit about the character creation. Like, okay, how do the systems of the game work in terms of how you apply a lot of this information? Well, they have these things called ways, and they're basically skills. They're basically skills and abilities that allow you to be better at something. Like, case in point, you want to be the world's greatest detective? Well, there's the way of the detective. This just makes your being a detective that much easier and gives you bonuses to any roles you might try to make to suss out information. Whereas the way of the League of Assassins would just make you a more effective fighter. So that way, depending on what weapon you choose when you take on the skill, you might specifically be a badass with size, or maybe your thing is throwing knives, or maybe nunchaku or a bow staff, or I don't know what. But just know that whichever one you pick, that weapon that you use, you're gonna get extra bonuses to using that weapon. And all of the ways in the game you may or may not have access to, depending on what version of the story mode you're in. Case in point, if you're trying to get like superpowers, you have to have access to the Way of Wonders. And I will say this, that's another thing kind of going back to the story modes that I talked about earlier. Depending on what story mode you're in, you may or may not have access to a lot of these abilities. Like, if you come into the game and you want to be Clayface, you would need the Way of Metamorphosis. That would require you to be playing in the Wonders of Gotham City mode. And as I mentioned earlier, you're gonna have to have certain abilities or skills to get stuff done. That's where your test and where combat and stuff like that come into play. Just like with D&D, every test has a difficulty, challenge. I'll give you some examples from the book. Things that are considered like a challenge rating of 5, a difficulty of 5, would be like searching an individual, following tracks in mud or snow, or listening to a loud conversation in public, whereas a medium difficulty would be like 10, like climbing a wall with the necessary equipment, or spotting thugs disguised as clowns at a fun fair, whereas 15 would be just about catching your balance after falling, or convincing the guards at Arkham Asylum that you've been wrongfully incarcerated. A difficulty of 20 would be like trying to knock an opponent's weapon out of their hand using a batarang, or trying to solve one of the Riddler's puzzles. That's considered very difficult. Near impossible would be like in the 25 difficulty range, where that would be like catching a small flying object in the air with chopsticks, or escaping the fear gas that Scarecrow has sprayed all over the entire city. And then there would be unbelievable, which would be anything 30 and over. That would be like hacking the Cadmus database, or grabbing onto a gargoyle in mid-fall from a skyscraper. So let's take one of our examples. In a test, you're trying to solve one of the Riddler's puzzles. So what would you do? Your GM would probably tell you that, okay, well, you've been told the riddle, and they'll probably have a riddle. I don't have a riddle because I don't riddle, but your GM is probably gonna have a riddle prepared. Your GM tells you to roll intelligence. Well, as it turns out, you rolled a 17. That's good. That's a flat 17, but it ain't good enough to match wits with the Riddler. The good news is you have an intelligence of 16, which gives you a +3 to your intelligence rolls. The difficulty was a 20, you matched that 20 dead on. Your GM will probably tell you something along the lines of, oh, well, since the difficulty was 20 and your score brought you to exactly that number, you at first don't understand the riddle. But as the last grains of sand are falling down in the hourglass, you just so happen to think of the answer right in the nick of time. Something along those lines. Sometimes you might also have to perform tests against other people. You might be trying to sneak past somebody and the guards are actively looking for you. Let's say you roll your test, you roll dexterity, and you add your modifier, you roll a 16 or an 18, but the thugs that are looking for you, maybe they only roll a 10 or an 11. Well, guess what? They don't find you. There's also critical successes, just like in Dungeons and Dragons. There's even exploit points that you get at the beginning of character creation and that can be earned later through certain situations that allow you to add a plus 10 to your roll. These things are in short supply, so you're not going to be using them all the time, but these are points you're going to use when, like, as I said earlier, in that situation with the Riddler, or maybe in the situation I mentioned earlier in the 30 difficulty range, where like you might be falling from a great height, you would be able to catch yourself, or at least have a better chance of catching yourself if you use an exploit point. And combat works about just as easily. Whenever you're in combat, you have the ability to perform either one limited action, which is something that basically takes up the entire round, so it's really the only thing that you can do, or you can take a movement action and one attack action, and you can do it in whichever order you want, or you can take two movement actions, meaning that under normal circumstances, if you wanted to move a certain distance but you wouldn't make it in a round, you could just double that action and then move twice and be able to make that distance. But you won't be able to do anything else. And in the midst of all of that, regardless of whether you take a limited action or an attack action and a movement action or two movement actions, you can also, in tandem with any of those three, you can take free actions, and you're allowed to take anywhere from 0, 1, or 2 free actions. And in the case of using 2 free actions, you can do that so long as they're not the exact same action. And just like in Dungeons and Dragons, how you have armor class, you have defense in this game. So whenever you're trying to attack someone or something, you're playing against that person or thing's defense. So you have to roll your attack, and if it's a melee attack, you add your strength. And so long as you either meet that challenge or exceed it, your attack lands. If you go under the difficulty, well, you miss. And the same goes for your opponents. All in all, there's a ton of stuff in there, and the campaign for the game is going to be going live on January 7th on the GameFound website, and I'll have a link in the description and the pinned comment below if you want to go check that out. Now, to give you an idea of what all you can get on there, you can get the Skyline Pledge, which is going to give you both the core book as well as the adventure book, which will have all kinds of different stories and scenarios for you to play out, as well as the Gotham City Guide, which is basically going to help flesh out the world for you and, you know, tell you more about some of the different areas of Gotham and the systems and rules that apply to them. And you also get a pretty awesome DM screen. The GM screen is really awesome, has all the different systems and information and kind of quick looks at the rules, so that way you don't have to go thumbing through the book to find anything. It's pretty awesome stuff. That one's gonna run 149 euros. It'll also come with a slipcase that can hold all 3 books as well as the GM screen, and you'll also get a PDF of all 3 of the Gotham City Chronicles books. You can also get the Sidekick Pledge, and this is going to be for people who already have the Gotham City Chronicles RPG, and you just want the minis that go with it. This was going to run about 129 euros, and all the minis in here are fantastic. I have gotten to take a look at all of them. They look great. I'll actually have some shots of some of them up here, you know, as I'm talking, but yeah, they're fantastic. There's minis for Batman, there's minis for Nightwing, there's minis for Clayface, there's minis for Mr. Freeze, and you name a Batman villain or ally or somewhere in between, I guarantee you there's a mini for them somewhere in this. But it'll be 127 minis all total. There'll be 18 battle maps, 14 maps, 1 Gotham City map, a deck of ways cards, which is basically just a way to kind of have a quick reference point for all of the different ways in the game, and trust me, there's a lot of them. There's also going to be 3 different dice sets and 3 dice trays. And then last but most certainly not least is going to be the all-in pledge. It's basically a combination of the 2 I mentioned earlier and will cost 199 euros. This is what Monolith had actually sent out to me. I've seen this whole game from the bottom to the top, and I'm gonna tell you right now, it's fantastic. If you are, for whatever reason, a fan of Batman or DC or tabletop role-playing games, or God help you, all of the above, this is the primary way to play. I think this is fantastic. It makes me hopeful that this does so well that maybe Monolith will get a chance to expand this to other like superheroes in the DC Comics universe, because I would love to see a full-on DC tabletop role-playing game by Monolith at this point, after having seen this and sat down with it and experienced it. But yes, I don't know, you guys let me know what you think about it. If you were one of the people who got to get in on the ground floor with the original run of the Gotham City Chronicles RPG, let me know what you think about this one. Or if you missed out on it before and you want to get on it now, man, go do the thing. The campaign launches on January 7th, and depending on when this video launches, the campaign will either have just started or is about to start. Like I said, links and everything in the description below, pin comment below, go do that, and yeah, tell them that the Blerd Without Fear sent you. But anyway, I gotta get back to poisoning Gotham's water, saving Gotham's water supply, and hey, delete that footage.